Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, community concern in Las Cruces. A journalist covering last month's mass shooting updates us on the city's response and how people there are recovering.
This had 3 casualties, 3 fatalities, and again, kids. And I think that's the part that's really sticking out for people.
And same cherry jacket, new head coach. The Lobo men's basketball team has a new program leader as Coach Richard Pitino leaves UNM for a job back east. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm senior producer Lou DeVizio. Lobo men's basketball has welcomed a new head coach. Eric Olin, who spent 2 decades running the show at UC San Diego, accepted the position to be the University of New Mexico's 23rd men's basketball coach earlier this week. Coming up later in today's show, Albuquerque Journal sports writer Jeff Grammer gives some insight into Olin's approach, as well as the legacy of outgoing coach Richard Pitino. But first, we turn our attention to Las Cruces, where people are still reeling after last month's late-night mass shooting at Young Park that killed 3 teenagers and wounded more than a dozen other people. Earlier this week, a Doña Ana County grand jury indicted 4 suspects in the shooting on first-degree murder charges. They are 20-year-old Tomas Rivas, 2 17-year-olds Gustavo Dominguez and Nathan Rivas, and 15-year-old Josiah Antiveros. The indictments were handed up the day after the interview that you're about to see from executive producer Jeff Proctor. The Albuquerque Journal's Southern New Mexico correspondent, Algernon Damasa, has been writing about the shooting and its aftermath. Algernon visited our studio this week to tell us about what happened and how the people of Las Cruces, including city leaders, are doing following perhaps the most public, jarring act of violence we've seen in the city in 35 years.
Algernon, thanks for being here and welcome back to New Mexico in Focus.
Nice being here, Jeff.
You have a new job since the last time we had you on the show. You are covering Southern New Mexico now for the Albuquerque Journal. It was in the course of that work that you came to do some reporting on this mass shooting at Young Park in Las Cruces. I want to kind of start from like 30,000 feet. What is an unsanctioned car show?
These are very popular get-togethers where young people, middle-aged people, find a space where they can show off their lowriders, they can show off cars that they've modified to be really loud or to backfire on command. There's sort of one foot in that tradition of car shows where, you know, the Mexican car shows where they like to bounce and things like that. And but these are rowdier. There's a lot of spinning out, doing donuts. There's tricks. Sometimes there's drag racing. They like to leave marks on the pavement. They like to raise a lot of smoke. And then what is also popular is that people will bring guns, and their rifles will be mounted with laser scopes and lights to aim them into the smoke and make lighting effects that people like to video and post on TikTok and what have you.
Gotcha.
And so these are crowded gatherings. They're really rowdy. They're really loud. The neighbors hate them because they raise a lot of smoke and a lot of noise. And it's scary because people like to get really close to the cars that are doing donuts and film them. And people get really close to cars that are not really in control.
Yeah, some of the video made me incredibly nervous just from watching. So it was at one of these kinds of events where this shooting took place. Walk me through the sequence of events that sort of led up to the exchange of gunfire.
What we know is that right around 10 o'clock, there seems to have been an argument between 2 groups of young people. Witnesses described one of these factions as the Rivas brothers. And it's not clear how many people brought guns out or what led to that moment. People were enjoying a car doing donuts one moment, and then there are these gunshots that ring out, and the moment is captured on video, and you'll notice that there isn't really a reaction right away because backfire is pretty common at these things. But the pops are coming rapidly, and pretty soon people start running. And what appears to have happened is that 4 people pulled out semi-automatic pistols and just started firing lots of shots into a very crowded place. At the height of this event, some people say 200-300 people were gathered in this parking lot at this city park. and people just ran, taking cover, trying to get out of the park as fast as they could, running in every direction. And then the shooters climbed into a car and sped away from the scene pretty quick.
You got your hands on some federal search warrants connected to this mass shooting. What did we learn from those documents?
So federal agents working with local police were looking for DNA to match the people who had been arrested with the guns that had been recovered. And so the search warrant reveals some elements of the investigation that they pretty quickly tracked down from talking to witnesses who may have been involved. And then they soon were following a car the next morning and saw what they allege was one of the now defendants in the case trying to get rid of some of the weapons in a dumpster outside of a residence. They also went into the residence, and some more evidence was found there, another gun. So far, I think 5 weapons have been recovered, and as well as a jacket that was matches a jacket that was seen in some of the many mobile phone videos of the incident. And so through that, we learned that there are 3 juvenile defendants who had had some previous interactions with law enforcement, some previous complaints that had gone through the juvenile court system.
What do we know about the people who were killed?
So 3 teenagers were killed in this incident. 15, I should say, additionally were wounded, and all of them were wounded either by gunfire or shrapnel. The 3 killed were these high school students in Las Cruces. One was 16, one was 17, one was 19. And as I say, 15 people who were wounded and moved to various hospitals and went to El Paso. And then we have 4 fairly young people, a 20-year-old defendant, as well as 2 17-year-olds and a 15-year-old who have been charged in the case so far.
What are they charged with, and where do the cases stand at this point?
So they all have 3 open counts of murder in the first degree, as well as conspiracy charges. And the investigation's ongoing. There may be more charges to follow in the federal search warrant. For instance, there was mention of the fact that the shooting took place about 350 feet away from a public school. And so there may be some more charges to follow depending on what else we learn. So a 20-year-old, Tomas Rivas, who is in custody, and 3 juveniles, Gustavo Dominguez, Josiah Ontiveros, and Nathan Rivas, who appears to be the younger brother of Tomas. And they're all in custody. The 3 juveniles are in juvenile custody ahead of further proceedings. The district attorney, Fernando Macias, has indicated that he's going for a grand jury indictment, and he's going to try them as adults based on just how serious this crime was.
Gotcha. So if I'm doing my math right, between the 4 alleged shooters and the 3 people who are dead, all but 2 of them are children under 18 years old. This shooting took place on the second to last day of a legislative session in Santa Fe, in which a huge amount of the debate, although very little passage of actual legislation, was aimed at crimes committed by children. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, of course, has admonished lawmakers for not passing those bills. There's almost certainly going to be a special session when we see some of those bills come back. How is this case affecting statewide politics?
I mean, the timing of it was uncanny. The severity of it, I mean, Las Crucens are traumatized by this in that it's one of the highest mass casualty events people have seen, certainly in Las Cruces, and I think statewide, in decades. And it happened in the closing hours of a legislative session where the governor was already indicating that she had frustration, that she had wanted to see a lot more legislation related to crime, and especially penalties related to crime. And she was getting pushback that some of the measures she supported did not sufficiently show interest in rehabilitation and diversion, although she does say that she supports those things too, but she did want to see penalties. She even wanted to see a younger threshold for trying kids as adults, and wasn't getting those measures from the legislature. So then this happens right at the opportune time, and as they're closing out this legislative session with all of that pressure. And so that was the impetus for teasing a special session. I'm certain it's going to happen, and we're going to be hearing a lot about Las Cruces.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's talk a little bit about local reaction for a minute. You had just mentioned that people in this state haven't seen a mass casualty event like this in a long time. There was a particular piece of context in one of the stories that you wrote saying that the city hadn't been rocked by this kind of violence since the bowling alley massacre 35 years ago. I wonder, how is the community taking this based on folks you've been talking to?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, it's not quite, this never happens here, but this happens here rarely. And for Las Crucens, especially Generation X and older, people remember the 1990 shooting event, sort of gang style, looked like to be execution style shootings at a bowling alley. That bowling alley is actually not far from the park. And today it's all boarded up. It's been closed for years. It's all boarded up. People still leave flowers. The 35th anniversary passed just recently, and people still leave flowers at that spot. It's a very living memory that this happened to us, and it happens to our kids. And notably, this had 3 casualties, 3 fatalities, and again, kids. And I think that's the part that's really sticking out for people. There's also frustration among the community that lives around that park, because people tell me that they've been raising concerns about that park for years. There have been lots of minor crimes there. There have been a lot of car shows there. Sometimes the activities with the cars actually spill out onto Walnut Street. And when asked about why not police events like this harder, Las Cruces Police Chief Jeremy Story points to a lack of resources, just a police force that's too taxed, that's always responding to emergencies, basically. And so it comes with the memories very fresh of previous incidents, as well as a lot of frustration about just wondering whether enough is being done to keep the community safe now.
Let's dig into Story just a little bit here as we get toward the end of our conversation. What are some of the specific complaints he's got in terms of the resources for his department, and what are some of the things that the city says it's going to do in the aftermath of this shooting?
Yeah. So the city has funded the police department for 220 positions, and Story says he's got less than 190 positions full. Police agencies across New Mexico, and especially in the South, where there are much poorer communities, municipalities of lower budgets, they're competing with the state police. They're competing with agencies in other states. I hear that complaint universally, that it's been hard to recruit good officers who can stay for the long term. Additionally, Jeremy Story has advocated strongly for technological resources, especially a real-time crime center that essentially conducts surveillance in areas of interest, more of the cameras that are sort of mounted permanently in places to kind of surveil what's going on in communities. And he's been a very cogent spokesperson and advocate for that. I imagine during a special session, we will be seeing his face in Santa Fe, as indeed we saw him go up there during the legislative session to advocate for more resources. Chief Story is also one who says that he wants to see more diversion. He wants to see more preventative stuff, and I think that's because when you have a smaller force without the resources you need, you want to try to address things before they become problems requiring a police response.
His ideas, whether that's the real-time crime center, which of course would be modeled after the one that we have here in Albuquerque, additional surveillance, those kinds of tools, how do those ideas land with the community? Or are his ideas resonating among residents down there?
A lot of people like that idea a lot. I think that people who like it envision it as a place that will be well-staffed and quickly responsive to situations before they occur. There is a contingent within the community that really likes to sort of emphasize public dangers. And there have been flashpoints in local politics on this that have affected the city as well as the county. A lot of focus on the unhoused population and a lot of focus on property crime as kind of harbingers of more violent offenses. The city, the department, of course, just saw its first in the line of death duty not very long ago. And that involved a person who was unhoused and appeared to be in need of behavioral health services and wasn't getting them. And a violent confrontation ended in the officer's death. And that has really, I think, kind of pitched the conversation in a certain direction. Although you also have community advocates and health professionals really trying to bring this back into a conversation about how do we help people who are in trouble? How do we get people into housing? How do we get people into behavioral health services where we're still rebuilding a whole system to deliver that kind of service, that mental health care, as well as what are we offering our juveniles? What are we offering young people to do? How are we engaging them and not just giving them things to entertain them, but how are we really engaging them with the community so that they have a sort of sense of public safety as well? And so which of those sort of stories is going to dominate is still kind of an open question.
Algernon, thank you for making the drive up. I am excited to continue reading your coverage on this and other matters in the Albuquerque Journal. Thanks again for being here today.
Anytime, Jeff. Thanks.
The reason Lobo basketball is really good is because for some reason, for 50 years now, they've been in the top 25 in average home attendance. That is why I think expectations should be high. I think the community should demand a lot out of that because they're asking for a lot of money. They're asking for the investment of the community. They're asking for the investment of state dollars. They're asking for the investment from student fees and all that stuff. If you're asking for all that, like, you better deliver. So there's some pressure on the new guy, but I think fans should expect it to be a pretty good team.
That interview with Lobo basketball beat writer Jeff Grammer is coming up in less than 20 minutes. And thanks to Algernon DeMassa. Now, we made a mistake last week, and we need to correct that. In last week's broadcast, politics correspondent Gwyneth Doland spoke with reporter Jerry Redfern from Capitol in Maine about lobbyist campaign donations he uncovered to the leaders of the state House and Senate. The donations appeared to be on behalf of an oil and gas industry group. Subsequent reporting reveals that was incorrect. The lobbyist filed the report with the New Mexico Secretary of State's office when he was working for the industry group, but the donations occurred a few days before he began work there, and the report did not reflect that. Redfern regrets the error. We are just 3 months into President Donald Trump's second term, and we're already seeing a number of policies described in Project 2025 come to fruition. It's a nearly 1,000-page document produced by the Conservative Heritage Foundation, and despite Trump saying he'd never read it, many of its authors now work in his administration. Mass deportation of immigrants, a crackdown on universities and diversity initiatives, funds slashed to programs invested in climate science and green energy. These are massive changes being made at the federal level, and we had 2 political experts here last fall to sound the alarm. Taped 2 weeks before the general election, political psychologist Martha Burke and former state senator Dee Dee Feldman broke down how the prescriptions in Project 2025 could affect New Mexico. As reporters scramble now to cover the many changes Trump has made from that instruction manual, we wanted to return to that conversation, hosted by executive producer Jeff Proctor.
Martha Burke, Dee Dee Feldman, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to start off covering the basics of this. I feel like for a lot of folks, Project 2025 has been reduced to a yard sign or a social media hashtag. So what is Project 2025? Who wrote it, and why is it so controversial? Martha, let's start with you.
Well, who wrote it? The Heritage Foundation, one of the oldest and more vicious so-called think tanks in the country, very conservative. They basically, in my view, this latest Project 2025 is their manifesto. It is, by the way, populated by many people that were in the Trump administration are now in Heritage. And I have to say, as an aside, that 2/3 of them are men, about 1/3 are women. There have fewer women. But it is a manifesto to dismantle the government, basically. They want to do away with any guardrails. They want to basically install the president as a dictator, with their help, of course, because depending on who is in that chair, they might need a lot of help intellectually.
You know, one of the things that I read about it, even before I read the document itself, was that the last time a conservative administration, namely the Trump administration, came into power, they didn't have knowledge of the bureaucracy. They didn't have their people in the Justice Department or in any of the key posts. They were kind of at a loss as to how to run the government and put their program into action. So this document, Project 2025, was deemed as sort of a recruiting tool and a transition tool, so that that Trump would have a operating manual once he got into power, and wouldn't just be playing things off the cuff.
And so that we're clear, I want to just pick up on something that Martha said. Of the authors of Project 2025, 6 of them are former Trump staffers. 150 former Trump staffers are mentioned in the document. So interestingly, in the last handful of weeks in particular, Trump's been all over the place on this. One moment he's like, that thing looks great. And then if he's sitting down for an interview, he's like, I don't know who did that. You know, it's kind of like the kid who spills the milk on the carpet and then runs away and says, I don't know who did that. And just in the last week, they've said, we want to create a situation where none of these Project 2025 folks would be in our administration. Dee Dee, why would Trump want to run away from a document like this?
Well, he's getting flack for it because people are reading it. People are realizing that this is a doomsday scenario for the United States in terms of all kinds of policies. You know, Trump has his rallies, and at his rallies he advocates all of the policies that are in 2025, and then the Project 2025 is the chapter and verse for his rallies as to how to, you know, deport millions of people who are here illegally, allegedly. And how to dismantle the EPA, how to drill, baby, drill. You know, Project 2025 doesn't have all the exclamation points and language like magnificent and the best, but it fills in the blanks as to Trump's declarations at his rallies.
Is it a little bit of a quiet part out loud thing, Martha?
Well, I think it is, because he's only disavowing it until he gets elected. And then he's going to probably embrace it. I mean, he's already doing that, as Dee Dee said, but it's in a little bit different way. He's trying to support the ideas without saying that he really is on board with these people. He's saying he doesn't even know these people.
Totally.
Some of them were in his administration.
Peter Navarro.
Yeah, he doesn't know them.
Ben Carson.
You know, it's a typical Trump thing. He's got to have it one way, and different audience to have it another way. It's okay to lie, you know, he's done it all his life. And I think it's clear that he would go along with, I mean, they wrote it for him.
I want to stick with you for just a second. The official title of this document is Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. It's not unlike the Heritage Foundation to cook up documents like this. Why do you think there's been so much concern and heat this time around?
Well, I think the concern is that they are all people that are very close to Trump. If he wins, he's going to march to their tune if he's still sane, which is a question in my mind right now. But it's much more blatant than anything they have put on paper before. They've always had sort of the pseudo-intellectual conservatism in their policies. Now, no, we're going to dismantle the Department of Education. We're going to totally outlaw abortion, and on down the list. So it's much more raw, if you will, and I guess that's so Trump can understand it. I don't
It's
know.
a 960-page document.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that in 2020, when Trump ran before, there was no platform even. And the platform that exists this time is pretty sketchy. I mean, there's really no there.
Yeah.
It's all generalities, and it's much more like a Trump rally than this. So for a long time, there was nothing out there but Project 2025. And so people were actually reading it to find out the stance of the Republican Party and of Trump on many of these issues, because there was no other place to find out.
Yeah. I've got a couple of minutes left in this segment, and I want to pick up on something you just said. So we invited the New Mexico GOP to send someone to participate in this conversation we're having today. They declined, citing the framing of this discussion that we're having. They also sent us a copy of something called Agenda 47 and said it was Trump's true platform. We looked through that 16-page document and found it to be pretty hollow. No numbers, no data, no real political stances, mainly rhetorical. Should the American people believe that that's the plan, or that Project 2025 is the plan?
Well, Project 2025 is the meat and potatoes of the very sketchy document that is now being used as the platform. And if you actually look at them back to back, and I did do that, you find that basically they are the same, except the platform doesn't go into detail, but Project 2025 does go into detail. And that's why I think the Republican Party is a little afraid of people reading what's in there. They'd rather just go with the rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It's kind of a hand-in-glove situation, right? Where the undefined portions of the platform are defined in this other space.
It's pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well said, Martha. Listed at the top of Agenda 47's platform is this quote: "Seal the border and stop the immigrant invasion." Migrants are mentioned throughout the document as illegal immigrants, with implications of negative impacts in nearly every policy category. That includes draining Medicare, overburdening systems meant for veterans. Dee Dee, how has this type of rhetoric, whether it's in that document or at a Trump rally, shaped the national conversation and the conversation here in New Mexico about immigrants?
Well, I think it's had a very damaging effect, particularly here in New Mexico, where immigration is a part of the fabric of our life here in New Mexico. Almost every family in New Mexico has some connection to immigrants. They may be their fathers, their mothers, their grandfathers, and not just from Mexico, but from other places as well. And in New Mexico, you know, we have 6,000 or so, maybe more, dreamers. There is a tremendous economic impact from dreamers, and also from maybe the 60,000 or so undocumented workers here in New Mexico. So there are a lot of these folks in New Mexico. They're contributing to the economy. And so hearing that rhetoric, I think, just strikes fear into their hearts. And with fear into their hearts, it means they're not going to be able to, or they feel they're not able to apply for a driver's license or go to the police in a case of domestic violence, which is really threatens all of our public safety here in New Mexico. So it's having a very damaging effect, in addition to, you know, creating this sort of 1930s atmosphere of enemies without permeating our borders, and we need to arm ourselves and protect ourselves from the aliens and the others. that kind of a mentality is the groundwork for authoritarian rule.
Agenda 47, which again is the tamer version of the Republican plan, calls for, quote, the largest deportation operation in American history. Project 2025, of course, echoes that sentiment. Can Trump do this? Is it legal?
I don't know whether it's legal or not. I mean, because the word illegal is spread around every chance they get. I do have one thing that they are doing, though, that is quite scary. The policy right now is that immigration agents do not come into so-called protected areas, which are schools, churches, hospitals, to harass and pick people.
Courthouses, too.
Yeah, and they're going to change that, where they can go anywhere, anytime. And it speaks of Nazis.
Yeah, and I think in the area of immigration, there is more leeway for executive actions than there are, and it's been so hard to get an overall solution through Congress that the presidents have been called upon to do various things. You know, one of the things that I find most frightening about these documents is, in terms of immigration, is the idea that they are moving beyond just so-called illegal immigrants into birthright citizens. Birthright citizens are people who have been born in the United States to folks that came from other countries, and they now are subject to deportation. That is going to have a huge impact in New Mexico. I think it is totally illegal and will be challenged in court, but it's just a fear tactic, yes, I think, that is being used to create fear, to create ill will and division amongst the folks of Hispanic origin themselves, so that they will, be afraid of anybody coming in more recently. And I don't know whether that's working or not, but it's very dangerous.
Yeah, the birthright citizenship part 2 is also undercovered. It's not enough a part of the public discourse. Go ahead, Martha.
Well, here's a direct quote from Project 2025 that is chilling. Project 2025 says it has a call to reinstate, quote, every rule related to immigration that was issued, unquote, during Trump's first term. Mm-hmm. And if it's every rule, then it's going to be every rule and more, right, if he gets back in.
And remember, one of those rules was family separation.
Yes.
Thanks again to Martha Burke and Dee Dee Feldman for their time late last year. You can watch their whole conversation with Jeff about Project 2025 on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. Now for a bit of a break from the heaviness of the news cycle right now. We're going to talk Lobo basketball. UNM fans have been through the ringer themselves over the past few weeks. The team has gone from regular season Mountain West champs to conference tournament losers. They were victorious in the first round of March Madness, only to lose a heartbreakingly close game in the second round. And days later, their coach, Richard Pitino, announced he was moving on to greener pastures in the Big East. Toss in 8 roster players entering the transfer portal, and there's a lot of uncertainty around Lobo basketball this offseason. The school moved quickly to solidify one of those areas, signing Pitino's replacement, Eric Olin, from UC San Diego last weekend. The school formally introduced him Tuesday.
This is a championship program. The best fans in the country deserve a team that walks into the pit with the same energy and enthusiasm that you do. A team that shows a care factor that rivals yours. Walking onto the floor last night gave me chills. I'm so fired up to feel it in person.
Albuquerque Journal sports writer Jeff Grammer has covered the Lobos for years. He visited our studio after Olin's introduction for some perspective on where the team stands this offseason. Jeff Grammer, thanks so much for being here. Welcome back.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Yeah. Now, we've caught up the last 3 years after the NCAA basketball tournament. Obviously, it's still going on, but the Lobos have been eliminated. We just ran through the year that was leading into this. I'll get to that with you in just a few minutes here. We also heard from the new coach, Eric Olin. You were at his introduction this week. and you had him on your podcast Talking Grammar earlier this week too. He sounds excited. What should Lobo fans know about him?
Smart. I mean, he knows his wife. It's funny, at the introductory press conference, I had already had him on the podcast, as you mentioned, so I talked to him for 40 minutes. I didn't have much to talk to him about at his press conference, so I saw his wife sitting to the side, and I went and talked to her for 25 minutes. I said, all right, give me what do we really need to know about this guy? And she said, he's a bit of a nerd. He can figure out a Rubik's Cube. He talks about numbers all the time. And that's the kind of stuff that I think Lobo fans are actually going to see, maybe not the Rubik's Cube part, but like, he is really into numbers. He is really into efficiency. He wants to put players on the floor that complement each other statistically. He wants to put them on spots on the floor, and everything he's doing is with some calculation involved. It is not just let's roll the ball out there and hope we have the best athletes. It is guys that can shoot three-pointers. Lobo fans should know that his UC San Diego teams, where he came from, some of the highest three-point rates in all of college basketball. They shoot more three-pointers than most teams in the entire country. And there are 364 Division I teams. His teams are consistently in the top 10 or 20 in how many three-pointers they shoot. And the obvious part of that is the math is 3 points are worth more than 2. So they're going to shoot a lot of threes. It's sort of what modern NBA basketball is about. It is modern basketball is going that way. He is all about where the math on the floor works is what he is going to try and attack. As he said, maximize what we're good at, minimize our deficiencies, and don't do that. If we're not good at this, let's not do it. One example of that Lobo fans should know is this past year when he went 30-5 at UCSD, pretty small team. He had 4 starters that were Division II transfers. Well, because he was small, he knew he wasn't going to win many rebounding battles. So instead of trying to beat tougher, bigger teams in rebounding, he just kind of changed their defense in their matchup zone defense to try and, on the perimeter, steal the ball before they ever got it inside. And they were number 2 in the country in steal rate because of it. So he will figure out what his roster is good at and bad at and then try and adjust based on that. And they, like I said, were one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the country in steal rate because he didn't want to have to worry about them getting the ball inside. He wanted to try and figure out how to get the ball away from them scoring inside because he just knew he didn't have size. So he's a real smart guy. I think Lobo fans are going to enjoy him. We'll see what he does in terms of handling 15,000 fans in an arena when basically he was a Division II coach for a lot of his career. And in this past year, they got up to over 2,000 fans for one of the first times in that school's history per game. So he's in for a big change in terms of that, but the basketball should be fine. The guy's a real smart guy.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he had a pretty good thing going at UC San Diego. Why did he decide to come here in particular?
Yeah, it's interesting because basketball, there's a lot of jobs in the country, right, that kind of be a vagabond a little bit, like just job to job hopping around. Newspapers sometimes are that way. You could spend a couple years in the newspaper, then go to another one. Coaching, especially when you're an assistant and especially when you're at Division II, you get fired every couple of years or you move on to another job every couple of years. Well, when he was 24, he was born and raised in Mobile, Alabama, went to college at an NAIA school in Mobile, Alabama, and played basketball there. He was 24 years old. His former basketball coach there got a job at UC San Diego and asked him, hey, do you want to come be an assistant coach? So he moves at the age of 24 thinking I'll be here a year or two, then I'll probably get fired. Told his girlfriend at the time, who is now his wife, don't even move out here because I'm probably getting fired at the end of the year. Coaches move around all the time. Well, after 5 years of that, they said, okay, this long distance thing isn't working. I'll move out there. It is one of the most unique things in college basketball that he, at the age of 24, spent 21 years at the first job he got. The first coaching job he ever had in his life was UC San Diego, and he was there until Sunday when he accepted this Lobo job. The reason he decided to come to New Mexico, I think it's fair to say the really obvious reason was he was getting paid $345,000 in base salary at UC San Diego. He's now getting paid $1.2 million annually at UNM. But the other part is he for a few years now has sort of been at a point, he's 44 years old, and I think through the late 30s especially and into his early 40s, he was sort of at a point where I think a lot of people get where they want to challenge themselves. And he genuinely wants a bigger opportunity, a bigger challenge, and there's not bigger challenges out there, especially on the West Coast, the western part of the country, than getting New Mexico basketball right. And he's got a big responsibility for that, though, because the school still depends a lot on Lobo basketball making its money in terms of athletics.
I hate to ask this so early on, but after spending 20 years at a program, coming to a new place, do you see him spending a long time here, or could this just be the first rung on a ladder up the NCAA ranks?
It could be. First of all, we don't know. I think a lot of people when a coach moves on, like Richard Pitino just did, a lot of people say, well, what are we anymore? Just a stepping stone kind of job. What is this? The reality of New Mexico basketball is since the 60s, the modern era of Lobo basketball started in 1966 when the pit opened and Bob King was coach. In this modern era, since the mid-60s, there have been 3 coaches that moved on to better jobs. It was Dave Bliss, and he spent a decade as the Lobos coach. It was Steve Alford, went on to UCLA, and he spent 6 years as the Lobos coach. And then it was Richard Pitino, who went on to the Big East and Xavier, and a bigger payday. And that was after 4 years, and all of them won multiple championships. So if this is a stepping stone like those jobs were for those coaches, then the Lobos are probably going to have a couple more championships, a couple more NCAA tournaments, and it could be that he just moves on. Nobody really knows because he has a 21-year coaching record that was all at one place. So the fact that he's even here is sort of the anomaly right now. Will he move on? It could be. We'll find out. This is a new era of college basketball where even the players are moving on every single year. And that's part of his challenge is he has to now recruit an entire roster at a level of basketball that he's never coached at before. So that'll be one of the challenges. But if they have success here, like some people think he is capable of having, yeah, he might move on, but I'll bet you it'll be after a lot of really good success.
Okay, yeah. We're all excited to see what he can do. Let's talk about Pitino for a minute. When we sat here last year, you told me Pitino was happy. I mean, that was consensus among everybody around the team. Was it just the money? Obviously, that's a huge, for anybody, it's hard to turn that down. But what else about the Xavier job was too hard to pass up for him?
A couple things. Since last year, and last year, while he was still happy at New Mexico, he did talk and was a finalist at Louisville. There's a job opening at Louisville, and he had coached there before. Pat Kelsey ended up getting it, and they did great. But he did talk with another job there. Would have got paid a lot more money, too. This opportunity, about midway through this season, it was pretty clear in college basketball circles, and really even here in Albuquerque, that Richard Pitino's name was out there. And it was out there because while he didn't tell his agent, hey, go find me another job, he made it clear to his agent, if there's an opportunity, let's explore it. I'll take calls. Part of that has to do, I really think a big part of it, to be honest, is the Pac-12 Mountain West split up. There are five Mountain West teams that are leaving at the end of July 1st, 2026. So at the end of this coming season, they're going to reform the Mountain West, or go reform the old Pac-12. The Mountain West that is left, including New Mexico, which basically got left behind, is going to be a much less, certainly football conference. The basketball conference will be a lesser conference as well. And coaches don't want to be in leagues that are considered one-bid leagues. That means the only way you get to the NCAA tournament is if you win your conference tournament. There is a fear that the Mountain West may become that with the separation of the teams. San Diego State, Utah State, Colorado State, Boise State are all leaving to help rebuild the old Pac-12. And a big part of him leaving had to do with uncertainty about the future, stability of NIL. He is getting now in the Big East an opportunity where the NCAA is about to have revenue sharing. And you can give money, the schools now directly can give money to their athletes. Well, at every school that has a football team, the bulk of that money is going to go to football. Big East schools, like Xavier, where Pitino went, don't compete with football. All that money gets to go to the sports they do have, which is predominantly men's basketball. And I think he is going to have at his disposal, I would guess, $5 or $6 million to pay athletes to come play for his team, whereas New Mexico, which has a very good NIL relative to the Mountain West and out west, might be in the $3 million range or less. So he probably at least doubled the money he has available to buy a roster. That's part of it. But he also tripled his salary. So that's a big part of it too.
Okay. What's his legacy here now that he's gone?
I'll tell you what, man, his legacy, and part of his legacy I think was formed yesterday. He had his introductory press conference at Xavier University. And he took time not just to say, I think my previous employer had a good time at New Mexico. He took the time, and there's a clip of it on social media. I would recommend anybody interested in it. Some people don't want to hear from the old coach. But I would recommend people find this clip. It is him basically saying, I was 30 years old. I had a good season at FIU. I went to Minnesota of the Big Ten. You know, 30 years old, didn't win as much as I had hoped, but I spent 8 years there, and I got fired. I was 37, 38 years old. I got fired, and I got humbled. It was sobering. I was down. New Mexico was the best thing that ever happened to me.
They called me and offered me a job. I'd been there one time for a game in the Elite Eight. My dad beat West Virginia to go to the Final Four in the pit. So I took a leap of faith, and I would not be at a dream job like Xavier without the people at New Mexico. The fans, they treated my family so very well. The administration, whether it was Eddie Nunez, Fernando Lova, the new athletic director, they believed in me. Garnett Stokes, our president, believed in me. And I learned, in order to succeed at the highest level, you cannot do it alone. And so many people there helped me win those conference championships, helped me go to back NCAA tournaments, and I'm truly, truly grateful for them. It was very, very emotional and hard to say goodbye to so many special people.
If he was just paying lip service, he went above and beyond what most coaches do when they thank their previous employer. Yeah. So I think to your question about legacy, he won a couple championships. He rebuilt a program that was a decade drought from the NCAA tournament, but he also showed a whole lot of gratitude in doing so, which was a big difference from about 12 years ago when Steve Alford left for the UCLA job. It kind of came across in a lot of people's minds more as, hey, look, UCLA is better. You know, how could I turn it down? As opposed to, yes, I'm leaving Xavier and it is a better opportunity, but you guys helped me so much. I think his legacy is going to be remembered very fondly here.
Well, good. Yeah, that is nice to hear. Now, as for the players, 8 of them are going to the transfer portal, including Donovan Dent, Mustafa Amzil, True Washington. Is this just because Pitino's leaving? Obviously, NIL money has a lot to do with it, but where do the Lobos go from here? Losing that many players in 1 year.
I'll tell you right now, I mean, by the time this airs, the roster could be at 0. It will probably be an entire roster turnover. And that's part of the new era of college basketball. With instant transfers being allowed now, you can play anywhere you want. You don't have to sit out. With NIL, it probably is in the best interest of every player every year to enter the transfer portal. Fans hate hearing that, and I understand that. But it's probably worth them testing the market every year. Because if you're earning potential, if you're not getting to the NBA, and your earning potential is actually while you're a college basketball player, which I know sounds weird, it's new for us all to sort of grasp, but if they're earning potentials right now, you should test the market every year probably and see if there's another school willing to pay me more, I should probably explore that opportunity. Now, in Donovan Dent's case, just to put some figures on this, he spent 3 years at UNM, gets in the portal, Kentucky was after him. It came down to Kentucky and UCLA. He is from California. He's getting $3 million to play college basketball next year. Donovan Dent may end up in the NBA at one point, may end up at a really high European league level, but he'll probably be making high 6 figures, maybe $1 million a year. Next year might be the most he ever earns in 1 year by staying in college and by entering the transfer portal. That's the reality we're in right now. This is a big, multi-billion-dollar industry, college athletics is. And for the first time in these last few years, the players get to get a piece of that financially. And yes, it is not what fans like. You don't get to know players from their freshman year to their senior year anymore. But man, if you're telling me, if I had a child who was in college and not even an athlete, but she was just my daughter's a biology major, say, if she had an opportunity to go to another school and get $3 million while doing it, I would say, yes, do that. You don't have to stay here. Like, you don't owe anybody anything. That's what the players are facing. It's a reality that doesn't make college basketball maybe as fun for fans anymore. But man, I would never tell a kid, hey, don't go earn $3 million to go home to your home state.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around, but
yeah,
I mean, who can argue with it?
Yeah.
In terms of bringing new players in, what kind of cachet does Olin carry? Are players aware of his coaching philosophies, and is that enough to give guys an idea that I want to come here, maybe build up my name a little bit?
Yeah, the easy answer and the safest answer, I won't pretend to know more than I do. The safest answer is we're about to find out what his reputation really carries, all that kind of stuff. I will say this. At UC San Diego, he didn't have NIL money. He did start a team this past year with 4 Division II transfers. He made one of them the Big West player, developed him, I shouldn't say he made him, he developed him into a Big West player of the year, a guy who might end up from New Zealand, played at Hawaii Hilo Division II team, and may end up playing in the NBA. And he developed these guys into that. But he wasn't out there saying, hey, we can pay you $300,000 if you want to come play for us. So he didn't have that at his disposal. Now he has a couple million, maybe $3 million to sort of use in the recruiting circles. And what I do think Lobo fans who are a little nervous that he's never recruited at this level should understand about how college recruiting works. There's now a basketball prep school here in Albuquerque. Brandon Mason, a friend of mine since college, runs the place. His team of 12, 13 players that are in the school, plus their club teams in the summers, this is ABQ Prep, is the name of the prep school, and it is basketball centric. He has 12 or 13 players, and the AAU teams have another like 20 or 30 players, right? Well, when Division I teams come, when a New Mexico level team comes, it's not that UC San Diego and Eric Olin in his previous job didn't have the exact same contacts. They just might have been recruiting the 6th or 7th best player on that team as opposed to the stars on that team. But he has the exact same contacts as does Richard Pitino and Isaac Chu, who did the main bulk of the recruiting here at UNM. He has all those same contacts. He even said this week, last week while I was still recruiting to UC San Diego, I talked to, because players are allowed to have agents now because of the NIL money, I would talk to agents who said, well, we like what you're doing, I think it'd be a good fit, but the money just isn't right. Those guys, some of those agents have already called them back and said, the money sounds a little better now that you're in a different situation. So he has the same contacts. He's recruiting the same way as he did. He just has a little bit bigger pool or maybe a little bit better pool to draw from now. I think he'll be fine, but we will see is the best answer.
Okay. Now, Nelly Jr. Joseph, he was a monster in that last game against MSU. Yeah. He's been a heart and soul guy his whole time at UNM. I know you followed him pretty closely.
Yeah.
Just now that he's done, tell me a little bit about what it was like to see him end his career with the Lobos that way.
I'll tell you what, Nelly Jr. Joseph is going to go down in my coverage of just sports in general, but as one of my favorite players ever to cover. The guy had a disposition about him that it almost seemed fake sometimes how happy he was all the time. He just was so genuinely grateful for his opportunities. I did a story about a year ago on him. He grew up homeless. He didn't grow up homeless, but he was homeless when somebody found him in the streets of Nigeria. He would go out and look for work every day. As 13 years old, he would be out in the streets in Nigeria looking for food and work. And if you got some work that day to buy some lunch or buy some dinner, then he'd go play soccer. And somebody saw this 13-year-old kid was really tall, said, hey, you should go try basketball. So sure enough, he went and tried basketball, and he wasn't any good at it, didn't like it, said, no, that's not for me. Same guy sees him a few months later and says, hey, did you ever try basketball? He's like, yeah, I didn't like it. He's like, just go try it again. He ends up trying basketball, looking really good at it. Long story short, NBA Africa gets involved. It's an academy in Africa that finds people like Nelly Jr. Joseph. They link him up with Rick Pitino at Iona. Richard Pitino's dad is where he started Nelly Jr. Joseph's career. He transfers to UNM for his last 2 years. By the end of his college career, which was just a week or two ago in Cleveland in the NCAA tournament, he was dominant inside. He was one of the, I'm not going to say the best, but he was one of the better big men in all of college basketball at any level, and he was just a fun guy to cover. He always had a smile on his face, and was just really grateful for the opportunities he had.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm by no means a basketball expert, but just watching some of those games, he really was dominant in there. Now, looking ahead to next year, new coach, lots of turnover. What should fans expect?
Look, for Lobo basketball, the reason they're paying $1.2 million to a guy who is getting paid, at a Division II school that just transitioned to Division I just 4 or 5 years ago. This past year, were their first year eligible for the NCAA tournament. The reason a place like New Mexico is paying a guy like that to come here, $1.2 million, and taking a chance on him is because this program should have high expectations. This program and this community involvement and the investment in this community or in the program, the ownership of this program really isn't about success in the postseason. Unfortunately for the program, they haven't been to a Sweet 16, they haven't been to a Final Four, they haven't won any national championships. The reason Lobo basketball is really good is because for some reason, for 50 years now, they've been in the top 25 in average home attendance. The fans that come in here all around the arena, not just the student section or not just one booster section, all around that arena make a deafening arena when things are right because the community cares about it. For some reason, more than every other community, almost every other community, there's obviously 5 to 10 of them around the country that are pretty special places like this. But for some reason, without that postseason success, New Mexico has bought into what Lobo basketball can be. At its best, there's a lot of community pride. Not you guys deal with politics all the time. I rarely do, but a year ago when they went to the NCAA tournament, they had a little ceremony for the Lobo basketball team downtown, and Tim Keller kind of said, I don't think he realized how honest a comment he made. He said, man, there's nothing I can do to make morale around Albuquerque any better than what you guys did going to the tournament. And he was probably pretty right. Like, I think there were a lot of people just genuinely happy watching a good Lobo basketball team. If they could ever get that for football here, be a heck of a thing. But right now it's Lobo basketball, and when it's right, people really genuinely appreciate and buy into how good it can be. So that is why I think expectations should be high. I think the community should demand a lot out of that, because they're asking for a lot of money. They're asking for the investment of the community. They're asking for the investment of state dollars. They're asking for the investment from student fees and all that stuff. If you're asking for all that, like, you better deliver. So there's some pressure on the new guy, but I think fans should expect it to be a pretty good team.
Nice. All right, well, we're looking forward to it. Jeff Grammer, thanks so much for being here.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks to Jeff Grammer. If you're a Lobo fan or want to learn more about the team, I highly recommend Jeff's podcast, Talking Grammer. He interviews players. He chatted with a new coach this past week. And regardless of who he's talking to, Jeff really is just the most knowledgeable Lobos reporter out there. So check it out. Now, we want to end the show this week with an exciting announcement long in the making. New Mexico in Focus will soon have a new full-time host. Nash Jones is coming to NMPBS after several years over at KUNM, where they hosted All Things Considered, Morning Edition, Let's Talk New Mexico, and produced countless pieces for listeners from both the studio and the field. So many of you will be good and familiar with Nash's voice. Careful New Mexico in Focus viewers will recognize their face too. Nash has guest hosted our show and produced a few segments, diving into the long-running fight over how election maps get drawn in our state, the worker shortage in state government, and more. Nash is a proud member of the transgender community who uses they/them pronouns, an Albuquerque native, and a many times awarded journalist at the state, regional, and national levels. Their first day in the building will be in a couple of weeks, and you can expect to see them on the air not long after that. We can't wait for Nash to join our team and help us expand our journalism on the show, online, and on our social media platforms. For now, thanks to Algernon DeMassa, Jeff Grammer, and everyone else who contributed to this week's episode. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.